Welcome back to the Takeout. Several Epstein survivors will be on Capitol Hill tonight for tonight's State of the Union address. Among them, Annie Farmer. She was invited by California Democratic Congressman and ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia. Annie, thank you for joining us. Just remind my audience, you and your sister Maria's attachment to this very difficult and criminal story.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Major. So my sister, Maria Farmer, was really the first whistleblower in this case. She reported Epstein, Maxwell, and others in this circle of power in 1996 after she was harmed on Les Wexner's property, and she also reported my own abuse at Zorro Ranch. And so, part of why I'm here is to remind people just how far back this goes and how long there's been corruption in this case.
You mentioned Les Wexner. He had a deposition, and he said to those who asked him questions, he was never interviewed by the FBI. How does that strike you?
Yeah, it was really disturbing to hear that, just because we know how central of a role he played in the financing of Epstein. People have long said an important piece of uncovering how this operation worked was following the money. And we know a large part of that money leads right back to Les Wexner. And so to think that despite my sister's, very clear description of not only how she was attacked on that property, but also how Wexner's security team threatened her and tried to stop her from leaving. And then we also know Virginia Roberts Giuffre's, talking under oath in a deposition about how he harmed her. And so the fact that the FBI never interviewed him after all of that is very alarming.
You mentioned Zorro Ranch. The Attorney General of New Mexico and the state legislature both authorized fresh investigations about what went on there. What's your response to what's going on in New Mexico? And remind my audience, if you could, the Zorro Ranch part of this story.
Yes. So I just actually had the opportunity to speak with her and talk about this investigation that's just getting started in New Mexico. And this is where Epstein had a very large property that was extremely isolated. And we know from different survivors' accounts that was one of the places that girls and women were abused and trafficked. And so I think it's really great to see that there are people who are saying, we don't have to wait for the federal government to investigate some of these claims. We actually have the ability to conduct investigations ourselves. And so I think what is happening in New Mexico could really change the course of this entire investigation.
Annie, how have you absorbed what's going on in the United Kingdom with former Prince Andrew and the former ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson?
I feel like watching what's unfolding in the UK is giving us all a lot of hope that even when people at the highest levels of power, people like royalty, are involved in harming girls and young women, that they can be held accountable. I mean, they are looking at this charge around the misuse of power. And really that is at the heart of this whole case, is how people misuse their power. And so I just feel like we need to be following suit, right? The fact that so many of these crimes occurred on U.S. soil and we're not doing something similar here is really embarrassing. And
yet at the federal level, not one single new investigation that we are aware of has been opened.
Yes. Yeah. And reporting that there was really, that they were closing this case because there wasn't much to point to further investigation. I think we can all see, people who have had the chance to look through these files, that there are, in fact, lots of things that should be followed up on and investigated.
And is it your belief that there are things yet to be disclosed, interviews in particular, these 302 interview forms that would provide, if released, even more impetus for potential investigations?
I do believe that. We're continuing to hear from lawmakers that even when they go to view the unredacted files, that there are still redactions in place, including, just some pages that are like completely blacked out text. And so, we know also that less than half of the files have actually been released, right? So I think there's still quite a bit of information that needs to come out that would provide really critical information about what happened here, why it was allowed to go on for so long, who enabled the abuse, and who participated.
Would you and your survivor sisters still be open to a meeting at the White House with the president on this?
I'm not holding my breath for an invitation to a meeting like that. We're here today to remind Trump that despite his wish for us to all move on from this case, that we're not going away until the law is followed and we truly have the transparency that we've all been, initially asking for and we're now demanding.
You've said in other interviews, Annie, it's a complex construct coming up with a definition of justice in this space. Help my audience understand how you're trying to wrestle with what it might be defined as. Is it criminal? Is it civil? Is it simply transparency? What combination of those three things?
Yeah, well, I think it's hard because it makes me think about, people like Virginia Roberts Giuffre who cannot be here with us, tonight. What would it mean? Like, how does her family get justice, right? When she's no longer with us, and she's not the only survivor that is no longer with us, right? I think about, my sister Maria Farmer, whose health has been so devastated by 30 years of stress related to what happened to her in this case. And so that's why I think it is very complicated, but certainly having a thorough understanding of what truly transpired is the foundation for then building, I think, the sense of a closure and accountability that we are all craving.
And very quickly, Annie, is part of that knowing the names of those in positions of judicial or Justice Department power who look the other way?
Certainly. I think that's, again, how someone like Virginia would not have been harmed if the appropriate follow-up happened when my sister reported this in 1996, right? So not knowing that there were people who had the power to stop this that didn't, I think we all need to know who those people were.
Annie Farmer, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and I thank you for your time so much.
Oh, it's great to speak with you always. Thanks.